afternoon and a warm welcome to this final moment of this year's Belgrade Security Forum 2021. It's wonderful to also have a real audience. There are about 30 to 40 people here. And of course, welcome to all of those of you who are in the virtual world of the Belgrade Security Forum. We have the special pleasure and honor to be hosting Ambassador Christoph Heusgen, who is speaking to us from Berlin. And we have a grandiose topic, how the world is changing. This was, among all other things, prompted by an interview that Christoph Heusgen gave recently to Der Spiegel, which was entitled a bit, in fact, very clearly, "I have eliminated the West from my vocabulary." We'll come back to that in a moment. But also, he was quoted in a big read piece by the Financial Times recently that Germany must play a much more active role in the world. We have a half hour, and if Ambassador Heusgen has flexibility, we can overrun by maybe a minute or two or three. And if not, we will have a hard stop at 3:15. We're of course a bit late, so we'll go, I guess, until the half hour. For those of you who, and they are rare, I guess, who don't know much about Ambassador Heusgen, he was the chief of staff of Javier Solana in years that are very important to our region and to our country, from 1999 to 2006, and then he was the chief foreign policy advisor to Chancellor Merkel until 2017. And last but not least, he was the permanent representative, or ambassador of Germany, if you want, to the United Nations. And from all that we're hearing about rumors, he will have a role at the Munich Security Conference. Christoph, if I may, thank you very much for being with us. You and I were supposed to meet many years ago in Washington at some point. Your plane was delayed by some snowstorm, so we never actually got to meet. Let me start out with kind of the big picture question. Change is a euphemism for what is going on in the world. Really, the sands are shifting around all of us in so many different ways. The pandemic, the economic situation, the rise in inequality, the rise of Asia and China, and of course, what happened in the United States with President Trump, with Brexit. We are in Europe, both of us at this point. This is what we really care about, but we want to know about the position of Europe in the world. Can you briefly say why you think the West is an irrelevant concept at this moment? Unmute, please, Christoph. And you have a picture of the Munich Security Conference behind you, so that's telling.
Exactly. Do you hear me?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Very good, very good. No, thanks, Ivan. At least we make some progress. Years ago we didn't meet in Washington, but now we at least meet virtually, and I hope that soon we also meet physically. Also, thank you very much for including me in the Belgrade Security Forum. Indeed, I'm sitting in the office of the Munich Security Conference. You see the picture in the background, and I'm indeed getting more involved in the Munich Security Conference. And actually, it was I don't know if you participated there 2 years ago, even when the Munich Security Conference had the motto, the title, Westlessness. And I was invited to the opening debate, and then I thought a bit about it, and I was at the time already in New York at the UN, and I thought that when we look, and you mentioned the Trump administration and what we saw in the US, I thought that we should get rid of this concept of the West. What is the West? Where does the West stand for? Is a Trump administration, is this a leader of the West And when there is the West, what is the East today? Is it the classical Russia, Soviet, what is left of the Soviet Union? Is it Asia? And working at the UN, seeing also a bit how the host country, the US, developed, I thought that, you know, who should work together and where is, you know, how can this world function? And for me, it's very clear. It's those countries that are firmly based on the UN Charter, that are firmly based and respect the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, those countries that respect international law, a rules-based and promote a rules-based international order. And I think that's something which is universal. The Charter is universal. Human Rights Declaration is universal. And I think those countries that stand on that platform, they have a task to work together. If we don't do that, if we don't respect international law, and I'm very sorry to say, we see it from China, we see it from Russia, but we saw it also during the Trump administration, how much they departed from a rules-based international order. I thought if we, countries like ours, if they don't work together, if they defend the rules-based order, we're going to end up, as Kagan, I think, wrote, we're going to end up in the jungle, and we don't want that. And therefore, I think that we have to promote the international rules-based order. This is somewhere where Germany, to answer your second question, which you haven't put, where Germany has to play a more important role. We are the fourth largest country when it comes to GDP. We are the second largest donor to the UN system overall, the second largest, more than China and Japan and other countries. And so we think we have an obligation there to step up and see to it that we do what we want. The Chancellor Merkel, who I had really the privilege to work with, has gradually started that. Look at the Ukraine conflict. When you look at the Balkans, who promoted the Berlin Conference or the Berlin process, which is still very important. It brings the Balkan countries, EU countries around, Balkan countries around the table. The Libya political process started at the Berlin Conference last year. Or look at now when we started, I think it took 2 years for the Chancellor at the time to travel to Africa. Now she's almost on a daily basis on the phone with African leaders, and also how important it is also to that Germany plays a role there. So this is briefly where I stand on the two questions you asked.
Okay, you've mentioned a lot of things that I want to ask you about, and thank you for preempting some of these things. But I do want to come back to Germany a little later. We just had Sylvie Kaufmann, whom you may know, who is the editorial director at Le Monde in Paris, and she mentioned, of course, what you just mentioned, that there are a lot of autocratic trends, let me keep it simple, in the world, and it's about preserving the international-based, rules-based order. Let me put it to you directly on the subject of Europe. There's much talk about the G2 world, which I'm sure you've dealt with. In fact, if I may mention, your colleague, the Chinese ambassador, apparently in the United Nations, said that he was happy to see you leave because of your outspokenness in the Security Council, and that, I think, is to your credit. How is the position of Europe, and how does Europe stand out and defend these values more assertively in a situation where Europe's population is shrinking? Yes, it is a very strong economic continent. Germany is at the forefront. The transatlantic relation remains one of the key relationships in the world, also in economic terms, not only because of NATO and security. What should Europe do more? And if I may, you said that the Chancellor was very proactive. One of the things where Europe was not proactive was in the Middle East. And the fact that Syria exploded and that Europe was nowhere to be seen, even if this is our immediate neighborhood, I would put that on the balance sheet on one of the things where basically Europe failed. How does Europe, for example, get more engaged in something that is so relevant to our position?
Yes, I think that's a very, if I may say, a very pertinent question. Number one, we should not underestimate the weight of Europe. And when it comes to the original core business of Europe, and that is trade policy, we are and we remain a very strong actor because of the competence that the European Commission has. Also, when you look at refugees worldwide, when you look at where people want to travel, where you know, from, you mentioned all the authoritarian countries, ask them at the authoritarian leaders and the oligarchs and whatever, where would they like to have their villa, you know, and there will be European spots there. So we shouldn't be too negative about what we have achieved. We have our challenges, yes, but we have to work on that. There are several things. First, we have to preserve what we have. Number two, on the issue that you mentioned, foreign policy. It is difficult. Foreign policy is at the core of national sovereignty, and to give up, you know, the national sovereignty is very hard. You know, Germany is very close to our French friends, but no, it was so difficult to convince our French colleagues who are, of course, have a special status in New York as a, you know, as a P5, a permanent member, to say, okay, we are ready as France to, when there are EU positions, to clearly state and represent Europe in the Security Council. Not European seat is not possible, but you know, the Europeans could do more together, and France now with Great Britain now could take more responsibility there, and I think we all would love that. But you know, as I said, it's a core of national sovereignty. We have to overcome that. We have to deal, first of all, you know, coming back to what I said earlier, on our immediate neighborhood. So it is the Balkans, it is the area, you know, to the east of the European Union, it is North Africa, but Middle East as well. When I was with Solana, the quartet still existed, and actually Javier Solana was the representative. At the time, there was still some movement. You had Olmert as a prime minister, but then, you know, Arafat had disagreed with Camp David, and then Olmert and Abu Mazen, the successor there, was not, you know, the most, this not the strongest actor today. He has lost legitimacy basically, and then we had Netanyahu, nothing moved. I'm afraid in the Middle East and the Gulf, for that matter, with Iran, we can do something together with the Americans, and with others alone, I'm not sure. We went as far as we could, and that is a success story of the Europe, one of the success stories in the Iran, the JCPOA. It was, I think, a good combination of France, Germany, and Britain, with the EU actually taking the lead. It was Cathy Ashton and Mogherini who took the lead, together with Helga Schmidt, who was the brain woman behind the whole thing. And that was a very good EU success. And I really regret, it was really horrible that the Trump administration then got rid of the JCPOA, which I think was the best we could read. But these are kind of activities which we should continue to assume with a strong EU, but we need to also have then the member states run in on some issues. We need our American friends, and as long as that is possible, and as long as they are to a certain degree active, we can do it. But I see on the Middle East, for instance, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I don't see any movement, any interest in the US government now to spend political capital at a time where the domestic agenda is as heavy as it is, and we have to understand that.
Remaining on this broad subject, I'll bring up the term strategic autonomy and link to the Franco-German engine, which is either stalling or still strong. And we'll see, you know, probably President Macron is re-elected, and we're back in business. And having mentioned the transatlantic relationship, and of course the wake-up call that happened with both Trump and Brexit, I think was a moment where Europe realized that it needs a little more hard power activity and presence to be able to act alone, especially the torpedoing of the JCPOA that you mentioned was also a very detrimental fact. How do you see going forward this idea of strategic autonomy And is it, does it entail a strong defense and security element, or is it something more than just that?
This sounds, strategic autonomy sounds like a great slogan, or European sovereignty, etc. I'm very careful. You know, we Europeans were not able to secure Kabul airport to get our citizens out. If it hadn't been for the Americans, we couldn't have even done that. You know, if we cannot protect an airport in a you know, kind of a unfriendly environment, how can we then have European sovereignty? You know? So we should be careful there. So we should do everything, you know, also looking back at our history of Europe, to keep the US on board and to see that they you know, remain in NATO, that they committed to European security. We would be really, we would be idiots if we, you know, would give that up. But, and there, Macron and absolutely right, and the Chancellor has said that we have to be ready for situations where we cannot rely on our American friends. You know, talking about the Balkans. You know, when the Balkan crisis broke out in the 90s, we were not able to manage it. We needed the US to solve the problem in Bosnia and in Kosovo. And I'm not so sure if that reoccurred, you know, totally theoretical, if we would be back. And so if today US Congress, US President would say, okay, I'd bring, you know, thousands of troops to Europe to solve this regional problem. It's up to the Europeans to do it. In this connection, I think that indeed we have to look at our capabilities. What can we do? Where are deficits? We should go for it. We could see, you know, I was still with Solana when we created the European battle groups. You know, on paper it sounds great. It was never used. So we have to be not the grandstanding, but do practical things, have a small, you know, rapid reaction force that actually trains together, works together, and we get it into operation. Back to you.
Yeah, more walking along with the talking. I would agree with you on that. And you've already mentioned it, in this, the FT that quoted you, you put these issues that you mentioned yourself, Western Balkans, Libya, Sahel, and others. It was during your tenure as advisor to the Chancellor that the Berlin process was initiated, which was extremely welcomed. It was to beef up the whole situation. As was said in the previous Kosovo panel, the 2013 April agreement that Cathy Ashton brokered between Serbia and Kosovo was a game changer in so many ways. I remember celebrating. We were at Globsec in Bratislava. Things have moved too slowly to maybe even be euphemistic about it. And this is a process that's owned by the European Union. Again, Sylvie Kaufmann, if no one else, reminded us of that. But as you rightly said, this all does not happen without the United States. And you've probably seen that your colleague, Christopher Hill, has been brought back in from retirement. He will be the ambassador to Belgrade. The Americans seem to be kicking into a higher gear and wanting, we don't know yet, what they intend to do to maybe speed up the finding of a solution on Serbia and Kosovo. And as you know also, Jim O'Brien has been nominated now to be the sanctions person in the rank of ambassador, and all behind this Biden idea that democracy is key and that corruption is corrosive to democracy, and it seems that there will be a system of sanctions that will be imposed. The question to you, Christoph, is do you see a need to kind of do a Berlin process too, to come back to a stronger activity where Europe will do other things, maybe like geoeconomics, as the political process is of negotiations and finding a solution is being carried on? How do you see the engagement of Germany in particular, again, maybe with France, in trying to move more quickly, obviously with the background of the so-called third-party engagement, the Russias, Chinas, Turkeys, and others in this region that seem to have found a bit of an open space?
Yes, I mean, you are sitting in Belgrade, and Belgrade is key. The whole region is key, and this is why the Chancellor started the Berlin process. And I know from her that until her last day as Chancellor, she's concerned. She traveled to the region, speaks to the leaders, and she knows how important it is to fill this process with substance. I know also that from the European side, from Ursula von der Leyen, who was working in the cabinet of Chancellor Merkel for many years, and her thinking is very much alike. I know that EU will continue to engage, and I'm very hopeful that a new German government will engage. We have, and let's be honest there, we have, due to the problems we have within the European Union on some of the issues, and the coherence is not as it should be, so the enlargement process has been slow. Thessaloniki 1999, I was with Javier Solana in Thessaloniki, and we thought that it was really groundbreaking with the European perspective for the Balkan countries. But this, it's 20 years ago, so we have to fill it with substance. If we cannot make, but what we should do, of course, is to continue this path, but we have to make it practical. We have to see that within the Balkan countries with the European Union, that the links, the ties are very close, that we have these meetings as we had before between the Balkan countries and the European Union, that we do on practical things, on investment, on trade. We created taken from the German-French example, we created with the Berlin process the Balkan Youth Office. I think it sits in Tirana, and I think to get the youth together. We should do more on universities, more partnerships between universities, that you are able to study. Maybe you take several Balkan universities, European universities. Students go back and forth. They can graduate in a Balkan city and have the same degree as in European, so that there is also not. We don't see this exodus of young people from the Balkans. So let's do a number of practical steps and let's engage. We need European leaders. We need also European Union to continue to. If we don't do it, and you mentioned it, and we have seen the billboards in Belgrade, celebrating President Xi, and so we have to see that we are not in a vacuum there, but this is something where it is in Europeans' interest that what you said, what Biden said, that this prevails, good governance, close cooperation of democracies, and we come back to where we started, because I unfortunately have to leave. Let's have the Balkan countries part of what I claimed of countries that are really firmly based on this international rules-based order.
Tell me, how much more time do you have, so that I don't...
I don't have, and I mean, even if this is a public, but I acknowledge this. I worked for 20 years from around the clock, and I promised my wife I take my boy to his soccer practice, and I have to leave now. So please understand me, okay?
So we'll do a hard stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, Ivan.
Christoph, thank you very much for taking the time. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.